when we think about the institution of marriage, because that's where, that traditional marriage is where the family
Mm.
begins, where it's formed. How has that decline come into to play with this breakdown, and why has that decline? Why can't we stay married like grandma and grandpa?
Hmm.
Well, first, grandma tolerated a lot of shit that I probably would not tolerate. First and
Hmm.
foremost, because my husband's not going around the corner to Susie's house, and my kids are not going to have siblings around the corner. And
Right.
I think a lot of them tolerated a lot of things because they didn't have the ability or the liberty to be able to vote, to have their own homes, to
Mm-hmm,
have their
mm-hmm,
own credit cards. That didn't happen until what, the 80s?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So many things that husbands were like slave masters. So you know what I'm saying? That has been encoded into the DNA of not only our men but our women as well, right?
Mm.
So grandma tolerated a lot of different things that women today aren't going to tolerate. As someone
Mm.
who was married previously myself, I tolerated a lot of things that me at this big age I would never tolerate. Thank God I have an amazing husband. Shout out to you, baby. But
Mm.
that has changed my trajectory and my
Mm-hmm.
narrative of what marriage looks like. It looks safe, but I didn't see that growing up. My mother tolerated a lot of stuff. My father was abusive. He was a drug addict at some point. My mother married and divorced my father two times because she wanted that nucleus of a family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then eventually, when she saw the impact that it was having on me mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, with his drug addiction and all of the things that was happening around that, and the domestic abuse that was taking place in the home, and she was somewhat abusive as well, she finally divorced my father and moved on. So I think where we are in today's society, in the younger society, I don't think a lot of times they really marry for love all the time either. I think some
Mm.
of them marry for opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
some of them
Mm-hmm.
marry based on what it looks like. They want to have these big, huge weddings so they can post it all over social media, and then they're
Mm-hmm.
divorced
Mm.
1 to 2 years later. So I think the priorities have shifted, and definitely the beliefs and the traditions have shifted because I know we're not going to tolerate a lot of the things that Big Mama tolerated.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, so when people say why aren't marriages like what they used to be, and a follow up question is obviously is marriage even still seen as a prize anymore?
Mm-hmm.
I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot about, well, first, marriage is not really a prize to those that can only think about and prioritize themselves, their wants and their feelings.
Mm.
So it makes sense where,
That part.
of course, you wouldn't see marriage as a prize if you can't think about more than just yourself and your needs and your wants. But
Yep.
number two, how can it be considered a prize if there's incentives and benefits to ending the marriage?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we have to acknowledge that as over time, as the divorce rate increased, as single parent households increased, there were certain incentives both from the federal government in terms of subsidies and with the way family court moves.
Mm.
Somebody's benefiting from a lot of these marriages no longer staying.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So from both sides, it's like if you have incentives for people to leave the relationship, and this is a great question, depending on the state and jurisdiction, in the U.S., can you legally get a court to extract resources from another adult person who you're no longer committed to, no longer living with, and no longer married to?
Mm.
So again, we have natural built-in processes that makes the process for leaving actually quite advantageous for some people. Does that mean everybody uses it for that
Right.
reason? No.
Yeah.
Some people just leave and say, this is toxic. I'm out. I don't even want anything from you.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a
Mm-hmm.
built in component to the way in which our government approaches marriages,
Mm.
where there are incentives for people to leave. And honestly, you could say reward packages. And
Mm.
so, it's one thing to be like, you know what, we need help with the children. That's cool. That makes sense to me. But when you're an able-bodied adult that's no longer living with another person, You're no longer doing life with them. You're no longer having sex with them. You're no longer married to them, but they still have to subsidize your lifestyle.
That I
Of
don't agree
course,
with.
yeah. So
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
course, there's going to be people on both sides now who are starting to see marriage as quite less appealing. And then the last question I ask is, or two-part question is, are there things that people in the past traditionally only got from the opposite sex when they got married that they now can get without getting married?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so if all the things that 100, 200, 400 years ago I could have only gotten if I got married, if I met your father, if I met your whole family, and the social shame and stigmatization that came with not being able to provide and pay for your dowry and do this or do that, I can skip all of that now. I'm not gonna have a child. I can have sex.
Right.
Yeah.
We can live together. So how can marriage be still seen as a high ideal with all the things that normally or historically and traditionally were reserved for it? Now we all can have access to. And then lastly, are those same things that I'm talking about that you would say you can get in marriage, do they decline once people do get married? Does sex decrease for some people, or a lot of
Some.
people complain about sex? Do a
Hmm.
lot of
Yeah.
people complain about romance be declining? So when he was dating me,
Hmm.
he did this, this, and this.
Yeah.
When me and her were just dating, or she was just a girlfriend, we had sex 4 times, 5 times a week. I couldn't keep her off of me. What is it about the marriage experience for a lot of couples where sex and romance decreases and people are thinking about what life was like before they got married and being like, I tended to get almost all of these things without marriage. And if this doesn't work out, somebody may potentially benefit more than the other and even get a reward package for this marriage coming to an
Yeah.
end. I can blame people on an individual level, but those are all structural things that most people have heard or experienced.
Right.
So that makes sense why for a lot of people marriage isn't really seen as a prize for most people. And I'll be honest with you, talk to many married people, especially ones that have been married 10 plus years. Do you run into a lot? You got to actually search for people who are happily married.
Right.